President promised to drain the swamp, but aren't the six of you part of what's been called the Wall Street-Washington revolving door?
Look, Chris, I came to Washington to make America great again and help the president with his vision and his mission, and that's what I'm doing.
White House Chief Economic Advisor Gary Cohn, one of the leaders of the establishment wing that is said to be winning the battle inside the White House for President Trump's ear. And we're back now with the panel. Well, let's look at President Trump's policy changes, at least some of them, just this week. After promising to label China a currency manipulator, he now says they're not. NATO, which was obsolete, no longer is. And the president also changed his mind on whether to close the Export-Import Bank. Michael, is the president breaking faith with his populist base?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that was a particularly persuasive list of changes that show that he's flipping. I mean, I think even this morning he tweeted out that on the currency manipulation, that's part of the ongoing negotiation over the North Korea thing. The only one there that really concerns me is the Export-Import Bank. When you kind of look at Washington, D.C. and the swamp, the Export-Import Bank is one of the ugliest alligators in that swamp. If you don't believe that, you should go visit its downtown gold headquarters. The Export-Import...
But I mean, speaking more broadly, when you see the ascendancy, apparently, of Jared Kushner and Gary Cohn and some of the other Wall Streeters, New Yorkers, Democrats, establishment as they're called, does that concern you?
No, it really doesn't, because I don't know, I'm not on the inside, who really is up, who's really down, or what any of these people actually believe. I have no doubt that Donald Trump is the person who's making the calls on this. And as a conservative, I'm looking at Judge Gorsuch, Justice Gorsuch now on the Supreme Court. I'm looking at a White House that really has been the more responsible and conservative part of the negotiating side of the health care debate. They played a very productive role. And so other than, you know, a couple of these Export-Import Bank type things, I think conservatives have a lot of reasons to be optimistic.
The leader of the populist charge, the drain the swamp charge, of course, is Chief Strategist Steve Bannon. And here he was a couple of months ago when he was riding high.
The third, broadly, line of work is what is deconstruction of the administrative state. That's all going to be deconstructed, and I think that that's why this regulatory thing is so important.
Now, Bob, if you believe the reports of papers like your Washington Post, he's down, conceivably out. What's going on?
You can believe that. I mean, that's true. But there is ascendancy, and then there is crashing, and you will see stories about so-and-so is winning, and then 2 weeks later they're fired. The question here is, who is Trump? And Trump is a pragmatist, just like those policy changes. We knew for a long time he was going to have a two-track strategy on Russia, reach out to Putin, but also be tough on a number of things. In terms of his staff, as best I can tell, it's a menu for him. I'll take this one, I'll take that one, and I'm not going to have dessert, I'm not going to have Bannon, I'm not going to have... And so I would not reach any sweeping conclusions. The real question is, as an executive, is this going to work for him? Because you're going to get stories like in my newspaper, which is quite well done, that there is a battle going on, and the battle and the discussion should be about the policy, not the personalities.
But I don't have to tell you, personnel is policy.
It is, but Trump is... Clearly, that, you know, we know from the campaign, 3 campaign managers, he's ruthless. You come and you go, and the people who are wise about him realize that they may be here now, but maybe not tomorrow.
There was another change this week by this president, not a change in his policy, but from the previous presidents. He now says that this White House is no longer going to routinely release visitor logs showing who's coming to the White House, who they're meeting with, as President Obama did. And another interesting development this weekend, there were massive marches across the country, people protesting. These were called tax marches, people demanding that President Trump release his tax returns, as presidents have routinely since Jimmy Carter. And that was the subject of a tweet this morning from President Trump. Let's put it up on the screen. President apparently not liking those marches. He says, I did what was an almost impossible thing to do for a Republican, easily won the Electoral College. Now tax returns are brought up again. Gillian, this president apparently thinks transparency is overrated.
So that's the message. I'm getting it loud and clear. But on both fronts here, with the visitor logs and with his tax returns, if I were advising him, I would say, Mr. President, bad news never gets better with age. All of this information will eventually be known. The White House visitor logs will be subject to FOIA requests in the future. We will see who came in and out of the White House, regardless of whether there were national security implications. That will be known. I imagine, I can't predict the future, but I imagine that at some point we'll get full tax returns from the president from the last few years. We've already had snippets of that, courtesy of MSNBC. So I think the administration really needs to kind of buckle down on messaging here when it comes to what are you going to tell the American people when you're out of office and all this information becomes known? How are you going to deal with that then?
But the counter-argument would be, Jennifer, yes, people do apparently care about this. In the polls, by a margin of more than 2 to 1, they say they want to see the president release his tax returns. On the other hand, Lord knows this was a big issue during the campaign, and he's President Trump.
Well, I think you have to see it through the light of what President Trump wants to do next. He wants to do tax reform next. He's going to need Democrats to do that. And already we've heard from Senator Schumer that Democrats are going to make an issue about his tax returns. If he wants to do tax reform, they want to see his returns. I will point out that when MSNBC received his tax returns from 2005, it did show that he had paid $38 million that year in federal income taxes. That was a rate of about 25%. It was higher than what Bernie Sanders paid that year. So it's hard to understand what he is hiding and why he is not showing these tax returns.
The American people, Chris, don't care, as you kind of said at the end, about his tax returns. That's why he won. And what he does is he sets up with these fights a situation where the media goes crazy over something that the American people don't care about.
Michael, that wasn't the media. That was tens of thousands of your fellow Americans taking to the street. And I got to say, that was not something that the media even...
It was very well organized by liberal groups, and there was money behind it.
But that was democracy when the Tea Party did it.
Sure. When the American people writ large look at this and they say, what's going on in North Korea, and are we going to have a lunatic with nuclear weapons who can hit us? When they look at their health care premiums, when they look at those
I'm not saying it's the biggest issue in the world, but
and so I think this is where the White House actually ends up making themselves look like the victim of a media that is coming after them over things that, look, I agree. If I were running the White House, I'd release the visitor logs. If you're having a untoward meeting, you're probably going to do it off-site anyway. But they create a dynamic where what the media is going crazy about is not what the American people care about. The American people care about the real policy issues.
All right. We have to end it there. More to talk about. I'd love to hear what you have to say, Bob. I will.
The power of no. Trump has just said no, and unless you can get somebody to give them to you, he wins.
Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday.